Welcome to Threatpost Now, Threatpost's video segment where we talk to the leading InfoSec industry experts about top trends, risks, and research that is happening right now in the security space. I'm Lindsay O'Donnell Welch with Threatpost, and today we're talking bug bounty programs with Casey Ellis, the founder and CTO of Bugcrowd. Casey, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And to all of our listeners, as a quick intro, Casey is a 20-year veteran of information security. He has pioneered the crowdsourced security as a service model, launching the first bug bounty programs on the Bugcrowd platform in 2012. And he co-founded the Disclose.io vulnerability disclosure standardization project in 2016, which is a collaborative project to standardize best practices around, safe harbor and good faith security research. So Casey, you have years of experience under your belt around bug bounty and vulnerability disclosure and safe harbor. And so just to set the context here, can you tell us a little bit about the current state of bug bounty programs and kind of their adaptation by companies in 2020?
Yeah, certainly. It's 2020 has been a pretty remarkable year in all sorts of ways. I think one of the side effects of the pandemic and of working from home is it's really highlighted, how pivotal technology is to life just in general. Going from the average consumer right up into the very tops of the largest companies, that's become far more obvious. It was always, a thing, but I think it's been kind of thrust into our face this year.
Right.
So, really what we've seen happen as a byproduct of that is, on the customer side, we've seen organizations really accelerate their security programs. As they've gone to undertake things like digital transformation. So companies that relied on a physical presence business model and had this kind of 3-year plan of a new thing that they were going to do to take better advantage of the internet. All of a sudden that project's now on a 6-month lead time and you need security for that. So
Right.
There's been a lot coming out of that. I think on the vulnerability disclosure side, for organizations, there's a growing understanding of the need to actually create confidence for the user. So this idea of neighborhood watch for the internet, that's something that the layperson can understand. And I think, a lot of corporates, but now governments and even election systems are taking advantage of that. On the hunter side, it's netted out to a ton more activity. We've seen spikes in kind of participation in programs. We've seen a lot of net new hunters come into the place. Obviously, there's a ton of content being generated now because everyone's doing that. So, folks are learning, they're digging into different domains and so on. So, yeah, in general, everything's just gotten busier.
Right. It certainly seems that way. And I think, you've seen kind of how bug bounty programs specifically have shifted over the past, decade or so. But are you finding that companies are becoming more open to launching bug bounty programs, or?
Yeah, definitely. And when it's an interesting one, because at this point in time, when we first started, bug bounty as a term of art was kind of the thing that Google and Facebook were making noise about, 2011, 2012. And we had to do a lot of education to the market around this idea that a hacker can actually be helpful, isn't necessarily harmful, which is the assumption that most people start off with.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of we kind of got over the hump, this idea of oh wow, okay, watching people like the Pentagon start programs, like some of the more conservative organizations that don't look as much like Facebook and Google starting to engage with the community. Bug bounty became a thing that everyone kind of realized was going to be here to stay in the IT space. Where we're at now is that I think there is a fair bit of term confusion around the idea of what is a bug bounty versus a vulnerability disclosure program versus crowdsourced testing. So that's the when you say bug bounty, I think people tend to generate a specific idea of going out to the open internet saying, hey, come at me and I'll pay you. which is one variation. And really, from Bugcrowd's standpoint, was always intended to only be the tip of the iceberg for this broader idea of like, how do we connect all of the skills and talent that exists in the white hat community to this problem of cybersecurity that requires creativity and is increasingly, in need of that as technology evolves. So yeah, I mean, the thing that we've seen is really, organizations actually, changing. There's a lot of people that are doing the work from home thing for the first time, especially, folks that are generationally older from a management standpoint. They're not as used to Zoom in the way that digital natives are, and they've kind of been forced into getting comfortable with that type of thing over the past 9 months. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing that do is translate across into how they approach accessing talent. There was this definitely reservations in all sorts of areas around engaging people that you couldn't, physically lay eyes on or have sit in the same office as you. We've seen that really get challenged, I think, in a positive way by COVID, which has netted out to more people being comfortable with the idea of getting, expert security help in from the outside world. So that's a big one.
Right.
And then, VDPs, as I mentioned before, like the whole idea of organizations actually being proactive about creating a policy, understanding that like technology is never perfect because humans are the ones who make it. So how are you going to receive feedback on risks that you might not be aware of?
Right. And, to your point about the current ongoing pandemic, I know that has had, several impacts, across the board, but specifically as it relates to bug bounty. Like I know that, like Zoom having kind of that influx in its user base, was looking to with their own bug bounty program and how they could improve that to kind of keep up with the vulnerabilities that were being process there. But are you seeing COVID impact kind of the bug bounty landscape in other ways, whether it's more bounty hunters who may be, starting to focus on bounty hunting full time or otherwise? Just not sure what you're seeing there.
Yeah, no, definitely. On the hunter side, there's I think a combination of things. We saw this really early on. People just had more discretionary time. Because they weren't going out, they weren't necessarily commuting to and from work, and especially if you're a younger person or if you don't have as many commitments at home, that nets out to more time to do stuff, right. Which we saw get applied into bounty hunting. That's continued, but there was, I think, a sudden kind of spurt of that. It's like, oh, we've got all this free time, let's go hack stuff, which is kind of neat. As it's sort of continued on, the conversations I'm having with hunters is that they're viewing it very much more as being able to take control of their their destiny in a sense, from an employment and an earning standpoint. It's like, okay, I can be dependent on an organization. I can kind of have traditional salary career path things that I have to figure out, or I can take advantage of some of these opportunities that are available to me to actually be the master of that myself. So it's almost like this idea. I've got a saying that I throw around that every bug is a startup and every bounty hunter is an entrepreneur. And I've actually thought that way for quite a long time because there is like really strong elements to that aren't all that obvious, but we're actually seeing people realize that and engage it directly more this year, which I think is pretty cool.
Right. I really like that, that saying. I think it really kind of drives home a lot of, the motivation behind bug bounty hunting for a lot of the bounty hunters. So good point. Yeah. And, I also wanted to, you made a point earlier about bug bounty and different terms and, vulnerability disclosure, VDPs, pen testing. I feel like those terms are thrown around fairly frequently, and I agree with you that, sometimes they're intermixed and, the definitions are kind of muddied there, and not just with, the more broader InfoSec space, but even with companies who are marketing some of these types of 100%. Programs. So can you talk a little bit, just to clarify the distinctions between these and what is important to kind of make note of in terms of how these programs should be marketed?
Yeah, and like fully acknowledging that Bugcrowd's in part responsible for this. I think bug bounty is a really easy to understand way to begin a conversation about this. That's something that we've taken advantage of ever since. I mean, it's there in the name. It's one of the reasons why I chose to call the company Bugcrowd, is because that's what people were thinking about at that point in time. But at this point, starting to disambiguate is becoming more important. I think vulnerability disclosure is really, to me, the superset concept. So it's this idea that basically anyone who has contact with your systems and software has the potential to identify a security issue. Sometimes they might go looking for those issues proactively. Other times it might just happen. There's I think it was the face mash issue that Apple fixed was found by a kid playing Twitch. With his friends. So he wasn't hacking or bug hunting. He just observed a security behavior that he then reported to the company so they could fix it. So it's really the policy that sits around how you as an organization are going to respond to that. If you're actually authorizing people to go looking for vulnerabilities, what kind of safe harbor you extend to them to make sure that they can do that in a way that has them feeling safe and not like they're breaking the law, but also that helps them define what it would look like to not break the law as they go about that type of thing. And then and the ability obviously to receive those issues. I believe VDP is pretty quickly becoming just a normal part of being on the internet. Right. If you see something, say something. I think that's actually more driven by consumer behavior than it is by companies necessarily aggressively leaning into it. But that's kind of the master concept. Downstream of that, you've got bug bounty programs where you actually reward people for what they find. If they're the first to find a unique issue, they get paid for it, and that payment's in proportion to how impactful that vulnerability is. So if it's really severe, they get paid a bunch of money. If it's small, they get paid less. Right. And it started off really as this way to say thank you for people that were working in a manner similar to a VDP, but really what it's turned into is a way to encourage and actually, attract input from the outside world. But the big thing, again, with Bounty is that it's meant to ideally be an open thing. So you're not actually necessarily being exclusive about the people that you invite or the scope of your systems that are even being targeted necessarily. It's this idea of, cool, hacker community, come and help us with our security and we'll pay for it. I think in those two cases, really the distinguishing feature is that the researcher or the hunter is the one who starts the conversation. So this program's established, and then, on a individual vulnerability basis, the conversation starts from the outside world into the organization, and it's on the organization to be prepared for that. Then there's crowdsourced security. So that's what Bugcrowd does with our CPT, continuous pen test product, with our next generation pen test product, with our attack surface management product. That's now starting to basically carve out pockets of the community that contributes with bug bounty and VDP. Understanding what kind of skills they have, but then also are they professional? Can you trust them? Is this someone who is highly skilled or someone who's just getting started? All those sorts of things, and basically deploying that group to solve specific problems, but on a private basis. So that's when it starts to look a little bit more like pen testing or consulting even. But really what you're doing is you're tapping the talent that exists in this enormous, wonderful community of hackers that we've got all around the world.
And, of those three, just out of curiosity and for some background, what would you say most companies are utilizing?
Yeah, I think across the board, it's actually, it was the third one. So the idea of being able, because everyone has the fairly clearly identified challenge of not being able to get access to talent. That's a known issue in cybersecurity. It's been a known issue for a really long time, and it's obvious. So when organizations realize that, hey, there's this enormous group of people sitting at the table waiting to help, and Bugcrowd's created this way to access them based on what you need, and for that access to be managed and orderly and all those sorts of things. that tends to click with any sort of organization quite quickly, regardless of whether they're, a tech company or, the like the Air Force, for example, or financial services. That's where we've seen, I think, most of the growth by a percentage. And yeah, Bug Bounty and VDP are continuing to grow, as like VDP is growing as a function of corporate social responsibility. Like I was saying before, it's, organizations are just starting to realize that, I should probably do this. If I can get security feedback, I need to have a way to do that, and people need to feel safe as they submit it. For Bug Bounty proper, like your Facebook or your Google style Bug Bounty program, that's a very noisy proportion of what we do. But I would say it's actually like less represented than the other two in terms of what we're seeing from a growth standpoint.
True.
It's just really fun to talk about. So it sounds like the only thing that people are doing.
Yeah, it is fun to talk about. Yeah. Speaking of talking about that, so I know in terms of Bug Bounty programs, a lot of larger companies like Facebook have, they have already they have like fully mature Bug Bounty programs. But then there are others who are just looking to start their own program. What are some of the common challenges that you're seeing for these companies that want to take the first steps and start a Bug Bounty program, and where would you recommend that companies begin?
Yeah, for sure. I'm a massive advocate of crawl, walk, run, especially in context of a public Bug Bounty program. We've had, and I still have frequently, conversations with people where they say, oh yeah, we want to launch this public thing with these huge payouts like next Thursday in line with a product thing that we want to get in the press, and whatever the drivers or the reasons might be for that. To which my answer is usually, you probably don't want to do that. If an organization hasn't had the opportunity to understand from the crowd what their true risk posture is, in all likelihood they're gonna find out pretty quickly that they've got more problems than they thought they did. That's a pretty predictable phenomena when we start a new program, public or private. Within Bugcrowd, we call it the oh crap moment internally. It's like, okay, you turn it on, it's like, whoa, we thought we were okay there, but here's a bunch of stuff that we now need to go and have a look at. You don't want to do that with a public commitment to the open internet to pay people for what they find at first pass, because it's just, like winding back from that position is difficult. So to actually work up into that kind of position, I think is the better approach. And I see challenges where folk kind of go off half cocked and make a big noise, but then have to figure out how to catch the piano off the back of that.
Right.
I think as well, you touched on it, and this is a conversation that I get into a lot, like Katie Mazuris, Art Mannion, folks that worked on the ISO standards, the 30111 side of that, just on how you actually fix this stuff. What's your approach? Most of what the public see and what we talk about, and what Bugcrowd's kind of known for, if you look at how we do what we do, is the intake side of it, because that's the part that's obvious. But then, once you've received an issue, then what? Like, how does that get factored into engineering capacity for a fix if it's needed? How do you mitigate? How do you prioritize it with all the other things that you're trying to get done as a business? The thing about particularly Bug Bounty in a public context is you're never quite sure when something's going to get found next, because that's sort of the point. If you did, you wouldn't need to do this in the first place. So as an organization, how are you going to have orderly processes on the back end to be able to receive this information and actually reduce the risk, and then ideally learn from it so that you can avoid making similar mistakes in the future? Like, that to me is the thing that is an intuitive, like, companies that are really thoughtful about this get that, and they'll already be working on it. But it's very easy to go in and just say, oh, cool, I'm just going to invite a bunch of hackers and then we'll fix what they find. If you haven't thought through like what that's going to look like on an ongoing basis within an organization, that's something that we see people, really need to get help with. And that's a lot of what we do as a company. Like the platform's obviously integrating and helping get, coordinate, get the vulnerabilities into the right hands and do all that sort of thing. But as a business, we've got a lot of people in the team that actually sit down and partner with the organization to help them, understand what parts they need to do next and where there might be gaps.
Right, right. I feel like a lot of companies kind of don't think through, how can they keep up with the quantity of bugs that are reported and making sure that proper triage teams are set up. And there's all kinds of challenges that they don't really think to flesh out there,
Yeah, and the remediation side as well. Like, how do you, I think the thing that I like most about this model overall is that it teaches companies that, vulnerabilities are a product of human creativity. It's not like this like head in the sand, catastrophic failure. It can become that if you repeat the same thing over and over again. But to begin with, it's just because people make mistakes. Like you write a letter, you make some spelling mistakes. Sometimes those actually change the meaning of the letter, which to me is an analog for a vulnerability in software. And as organizations realize, oh, this is a part of how we do stuff, like how are we going to compensate for that, feature of human creativity, like mitigate the risks that might already exist, but then figure out how to actually get better. How do we improve as an organization with this sense of almost confidence in the transparency of just thinking like that to begin with. It's to me, the companies that are over that hump end up being the ones that are most secure because it just becomes a part of how they do everything else. It's not like this other thing that you wrap on top. It's just a part of how you build your business. So that can take some time because different organizations are at different stages of realizing that.
Right. No, that's a really good point. Before we wrap up, I also wanted to make sure I ask you, what are some of the top bug bounty trends that we should be looking out for, in 2020 and going into next year that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think the accelerated adoption of vulnerability disclosure as kind of a norm. I was about to say best practice, but I actually think of it just as a normal part of being on the internet, as I said before. With the inclusion of best practices like adding authorization clauses to create safe harbor, adding things like coordinated vulnerability disclosure timelines that are proactively set. So at that point, as an organization, you're actually creating a public statement of accountability for the fix, not just how you're going to treat someone who's reporting to you. So I think that's something that is going to continue to accelerate. And what we saw this year was the voting machine manufacturers started doing that. We've seen states start doing that with respect to election systems in particular. We've seen the Department of Homeland Security issue a binding operational directive for every federal agency in the US to do that. So those are points where that behavior will, I think, trickle into the corporate space and globally as well. I think as well, just seeing, the big piece that I see happening from a technology risk standpoint is convergence, and that was already happening, but then COVID kind of distributed that convergence now that we're all working from different places. So really the attack surface and the way different buckets of technology are mixing together, watching the hunters adapt to that from a skills standpoint, but then also in terms of how they team up with each other. So I think traditionally it's like, okay, AppSec or network security or IoT embedded, like there's these type domains. What's becoming more and more true over time is that they're all pretty much interlinked now from a security standpoint. So seeing hunters become aware of that and start to take advantage of vulnerabilities that exist in the relationship between those domains, and actually use that to highlight that to the owner so they can fix it and think about it from a design standpoint. I think COVID's going to give that a bump. Again, as I said, because we're so, like, technology is so close to our face now as it
Right.
relates to just life, let alone work, but just
Right.
life, just doing life itself. I think. I mean, this is a great example of that. The
Yeah,
CBD right now.
exactly.
So,
Yep. I feel like I'm always glued to I mean, not just my phone anymore, but now my laptop and, everything else. So,
yeah,
um,
definitely, definitely.
but yeah, those are really good, trends to look out for. And, seems like they're also optimistic, which is a good thing too about certain parts of the bug bounty landscape. So,
Well, there's no shortage of bad news, so I thought
yeah,
I'd give you a couple of
yeah.
high notes there.
Always good to end on a good note, though. So,
Indeed.
Casey, thank you again for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And once again, this is Lindsay O'Donnell Welch with Threatpost. If you liked what you heard today, please subscribe to the Threatpost YouTube channel. And if you have any comments or questions or your own thoughts or observations on the bug bounty landscape, please do leave a comment for us on our YouTube page. Thanks again for tuning in to Threatpost Now, and catch us next week.